Another special Sheriff Sit Down here, presented by our Community Credit Union with Mason County Sheriff Casey Salisbury. How you doing?
Great.
So we are into the first week of August, and you and I and Chief Beeson from Shelton Police, Chief Beeson and Chief Deputy Sperling have been putting out videos, and there's been a lot of conversations about the changes in the laws for the state of Washington.
Yes.
And there's a lot of concern out there. I'm seeing on social media people are questioning things. They're looking at news reports from around the Northwest from the weekend even, and reading how law enforcement was unable to respond to this or to that because of their concerns about these new issues. So again, let's talk about what people can expect from these changes from law enforcement. And I know it's situationally different. Every situation is unique. But overall, I've got a couple things here I'm going to say to you and what you believe it to be. And how you think the responses will be.
Yeah, okay? And the challenge, Jeff, is just like you're asking. We have people call in the office, and honestly, the other day a lady called me very upset. And it wasn't a good conversation because she wasn't going to take my word for it. And I tried to explain to her, just like you mentioned, every situation is dynamic. And it can be changing as you arrive at the scene, or we're not going to go to something, and it can change afterwards. But the challenge is some of these laws are conflicting. Mm-hmm. And depending on how the circumstance, every circumstance is different. So we're being very careful, just like to answer you. I don't want to say, yes, we will in this situation, or no, we won't exactly, because somebody will call and say, well, the sheriff said yes. And a week later, they sound like they have the same situation, but there might be one thing different that they forgot to mention. And they'll say, well, the sheriff said I could do this. And so we're staying away from that.
Well,
go ahead.
Give me the best interpretation of your understandings out there. So if neighbors hear other neighbors yelling at each other.
Well, if it sounds like a domestic violence situation.
Okay, so this would be, I guess you can't even necessarily say a man and a woman anymore.
No, but it could be anybody that's lived together basically in the past can be roommates in college or anything like that. If it's a domestic violence situation and you hear pounding, which sounds like somebody beating on somebody or somebody like that, yes, you can call that in. There are certain circumstances where we hear that same thing. Somebody else call and say, hey, the neighbor guy next door is making noise in there and he wants to harm himself or kill himself. Well, it's as hard as this is to say, and people don't want to listen to this sometimes, it is not against the law to want to kill yourself. And for us now, if it's that circumstance, likely we're probably not going to go to that. Because if that person's in there and the only person they're endangering is themselves, okay. The problem is what they're trying to do is oftentimes or sometimes when we go to those things, the mere presence of a uniform, whether it's a firefighter or law enforcement officer, shows up, the situation can go downhill. Automatically they come running out after us with a weapon or something, and then what are we left with? So the law says, you're not to be there on that kind of stuff. Which in a few minutes later, the person could be doing something harmful to somebody else, could come out of the house and hurt somebody else.
Right.
But we're just not rolling up to that stuff automatically anymore. And again, I'm really cautious with this because I know that somebody out there listening or somebody that has to do the law is going to say you're wrong. But the dynamic situation, it changes every second. I've had our supervisors en route to something and advise our people, no, that's not going. The other problem that I've had is like the other day when this person called, they start the but what if. It's the yabbit or the but what if. And the problem is you can what if all day. So the person that called me the other day is trying to up the ante. Well, I call for this and you're not coming. If I tell you this, will you come? Well, it's not quite there. Well, then if I tell you this, will you come? And they're up in the ante. I said, the problem is, if you start calling us with things like the boy who cried wolf,
right,
you're going to cut our services down by doing that. It's just trying to find a creative way to force you into coming out to deal with something that technically for us is going to put us in a bad position.
What if somebody sees a suspicious car rolling up and down their street, either in the daytime or at night? I mean, they could be looking for a house address, or they could be looking for something nefarious, I suppose. I mean, how are you supposed
Are they doing anything illegal?
Right. I mean, I would under this example here, it's just going slowly down the street.
There's really, It used to be that easily we'd make a contact on stuff. Now different attorneys, depending on where they are going to argue different ways on what reasonable suspicion is and probable cause. But now with the new laws that are out there, we have to be so careful about police contacts, because immediately, if it's not something that they're doing that's technically wrong by some people's standards, they may be in your neighborhood, doesn't make them doing something illegal. And that's where that really fine area comes. Is there a little bit more than that you have that could be doing something, they're doing something criminally wrong. It's so difficult, like on use of forces, on I think Carol and I talked about this. We have a person that is having some type of a crisis, a mental health crisis, but yet they're not doing anything illegal. It's not really ours. That's supposed to be for a mental health care worker. Somebody's walking up and down in front of your business out here, or in front of somebody's coffee stand, in a public coffee stand, and yes, they're behaving oddly. Oftentimes people would call us and say, hey, listen, this guy's out here, they look like they got something wrong. Well, are they doing anything illegal? Well, no, they're just keep walking down the sidewalk and walking back. That's not illegal, okay? But to them, because a person might be causing other people to not feel comfortable to go to their coffee stand, they're calling and want the police to do something about it.
And traditionally, that's what the police have done, and
yes,
we've been calling the police since the telephone was invented.
Exactly.
For these types of things.
And now with the law the way it is, it's keeping us from doing some of those things, and it's very tenuous now the way that they've got this set up, and so you'll hear one of the state representatives that sponsored this stuff the other day. He was on TV. He said, "Well, that's not what we intended." The problem is what they wrote, and we have to go by what they wrote the law to be. And they're starting to find that the things that we tried to bring to their attention, they just felt it was better, in my opinion, to take some kind of action to show that they did something. And now what they've done is kept us from helping a lot of people. And I think, and I understand what's gone on nationally. I get the whole thing, because everybody calling in about that. I get it. But if you look at least in our area or our office over the years, and look at our level of force that we've had to use, it's almost statistically insignificant for the times that we even touch anyone or do anything. We've got a very good record here. We've done very well on training. That's not to say that something can't go wrong in the future, but we've got a very good record of handling people and doing a very good job with it, as does most of the country. But when they went out and passed these laws, very unique to the state of Washington in most of these areas, it's really taken away our ability to do the things that the public has always come to expect us of, especially in those areas of mental health where they think that so-and-so's kind of their relative or something. It seems like they're not having a very good night. They're having a hard time, as people would call us. Could you do a welfare check? Well, we don't really have a lawful reason to be there technically, other than you just feel like. Well, just feeling like somebody else might be doing well is really kind of on the edge anymore. And if that person does have issues and by our presence causes it to be worse maybe sometimes, that puts us in a really bad spot. And we're just all being very, very cautious on this right now.
It's been less than a week that these laws have come enacted for the most part here in the state of Washington, so we're still learning more about this. Thankfully, we have great law enforcement representatives to talk about it from their perspective, like Mason County Sheriff Casey Salisbury and the special sheriff sit-down presented by our community credit union. Let's do this more down the road as we start to hear different instances and
I would like to, Jeff, because as we talk, sorry, we're extending you out a little bit, but as we talk about this, what's challenging to me is we sit down with lawyers, right? Every one of them gives us a different answer.
Yeah.
We sat with two lawyers in a room and said, what would you do? And the answer was from one, well, you could do this or you could do that. So I asked the other attorney, well, I agree with my colleague, you could do this or you could do that. The law isn't necessarily clear on that. We'd have to research it. Nobody wants to give us an answer, but yet they expect us to have the answer. And it's been super challenging, and we had till the 25th of this month to get it figured out, and the Attorney General has almost a year now to come down with standards, but that we don't even know what those are going to be. And so what I feel like, what's very frustrating to me, is there's so many people that over the years that we've responded to and been able to help get them services that it's going to really change the outlook of that for law enforcement. You've seen on the news where they wouldn't release the dog the other night up there on that circumstance.
Yeah.
And people are saying they should have. Well, they should have, but if they would have, then we'd been violating the law and they'd come after us.
That was the Puyallup Coles homicide, right, from Saturday?
Yeah, I can't remember the business, but yeah, and
Something
it
there.
had to do with them not using the police dog because, again, we're talking about use of force. Is that in that statute use of force or is it not? And everybody's questioning it and nobody can give us an answer. So if you do it, you know, there's a chance that you're going to get in trouble for it. But it's challenging what's happened.
Yeah.
And I think the community, or I mean the general community of citizens of the state of Washington, not just in Mason County, are going to start looking at this saying, what the heck happened? And now we're getting calls all the time as these things are coming out of the news, and law enforcement are getting examples of what we can and can't do. They've limited our ability to use some less than lethal force issues. And we tried to explain that, and they didn't want to hear it, and now they've passed it, and now it's like what we're hearing back from that same representative. Well, that's not what we intended.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you wrote it.
Yeah.
And now it's having effect. And I think that many people, most of us, don't sit down and study everything that the legislature passed. I would suggest that people start doing that because there was a lot of things that passed this year that people in our community, they're appalled. They can't even believe that this happened. There are some that know about it and some that are very happy for it. But many, many people are calling us and saying, I'm really concerned about this. So we can keep going on that, Jeff. All of us in law enforcement are very, very very leery
Sure.
to give a yes, no, right, wrong answer because there's, as we say, there are more questions now than there are answers, and it's a very tenuous place to be right now.